Okay, so I want to begin with those of you who probably haven't seen me here for a while. And looking around, there's people who know me in all sorts of different ways here. So some of you know me primarily just as a coach, not just, but that's singularly as you know me is as a coach. Some have worked with me as a trainer, and some of you have a little bit of both. So the time that I was here, really in front of you guys with you, I was on as a coach, as a bit of a mentor, but I was definitely primarily an NLP master coach who was bringing to you different approaches to coaching. Right. So I was often sharing with you core transformation or compassion key or wholeness work or, and then of course, Alan and I did all of our work with PACE that we shared with you. And so it was always very focused on the core of it being NLP, which is still the case, and sort of branching off into these other areas. And so the last couple of years, what I stopped doing was reaching out to community as much as I had been in probably the 8 or 9 years prior to that. And there was a whole bunch of reasons. But I was starting to go in the direction of healing and quantum healing, and that was really, really exciting to me, and it was something that I really wanted to take on, which we'll talk about, of course, as the night unfolds here. We'll talk about where that ended up for me. But beyond all the reasons that are very irrelevant to why I kind of disappeared for a little while in terms of this kind of platform, a lot of it is relevant in terms of my kids were getting older. So I've got 3 kids, and when they were little kids, they were so, like, manageable with chaos, right? You could kind of do whatever, wherever, and they started getting older. My kids are now 12 and 14 and 16, and life has gotten way busier for them and way more scheduled. So all of a sudden, their lives had to be timed really well and precise and demanded a whole lot more from me in terms of being able to show up for them and making sure they were successful. I couldn't really get away with what I had been getting away with sort of in the first 10 years of COVID, right? And so the demands of my kids, I was also doing this PhD, which you guys, a lot of you witnessed how excited I was about all the work that I was doing. And it did. It excited me to no end to be doing all of this work, and all these courses just thrilled me. But I reached a point where what I had to do was a dissertation, which I loved brainstorming, which I probably did for nearly a year. Just sort of thought about ideas, passed them by people, talked about them. But by the time I realized I was actually gonna have to sit down and do this thing, it became way too much. It just became something that I wasn't going to be able to do, and I realized that I wasn't going to be able to do it, and so I wrestled with that for quite a while. And while I continued steadily coaching this whole time, so I was, in fact, constantly seeing clients, I backed off on just about everything else in order to maintain things. Alan and I also folded Inspired Outcomes. So most of you know that we shut down Inspired Outcomes. And that was for, again, a million different reasons. But it was just primarily because we were interested in going in really different directions in terms of our own approaches to coaching. And it was no longer this sort of integrated way to present both of our approaches to coaching wasn't working anymore. And so Al wanted to go in his direction. I went in mine. And so now I was running a business on my own. And so all of these things kind of just happened all at the same time. And I was overwhelmed. I was 46, I think, when this all sort of happened. And I was just feeling like I couldn't catch up. So I was in the process of trying to figure out how come I had kept things together and pretty successfully for so many years. And all of a sudden, I just couldn't get my feet out from under me. I just couldn't figure out how to make everything fit anymore into anything that looked even remotely like an ordered, successful way of being. So I cut back to basically just coaching. And it felt really, really kind, felt like a gift to myself to do that. But weirdly enough, when you cut your work in half, you also cut your income in half. So the reality of like, oh, so the demands of the bills and the kids and all that kind of stuff, that's getting way bigger. And there's so much more demand on what needs to be done. But there is less income coming in, which causes stress, which makes you less resourceful, which, and just this sort of cycle that goes and goes and goes and goes and goes. And so in that whole mess, I was also, like most of you, as a woman in my 40s, exposed to this endless barrage of like perimenopause and hormones, which suited me just fine. It was quite happy. Actually, I was really excited to be like, oh, well, that's what it is. It's hormones that is suddenly making me incapable of doing all the things that I had managed to do for, 40 years. And so I went to my doctor and I skipped over and was like, well, I'm clearly heading toward menopause because I can't do anything anymore. And then she did all my blood work and she was like, "Well, no, you're not." And so I insisted that it was probably incorrect. And then we did it again and we did it, precisely on the right days and with all the stuff. And that wasn't it at all, which was actually a little bit disappointing to me, like weirdly disappointing, but interesting, right? So all of a sudden I had this state of a life that I couldn't manage anymore. And Catherine, just to single you out here, I was trying to figure out what in the world to do. So it was really just a matter of like, how do I take all of this skill that I have and move forward with it in a way where I can still use my skills, do what I'm really good at doing. So in doing all of that, I went to Catherine, and Catherine and I were going back and forth with some coaching. And I explained to Catherine that I actually had to make some really, really important decisions. And I couldn't make mistakes on these decisions like I had made on so many other decisions before. And so Catherine said, well, what do you mean? Because it seems as though you make fairly good decisions, having witnessed your life in many ways. And I said, no, no, no. Follow me for 24 hours. If you actually follow me around for 24 hours, you will notice nothing but a chaos of just poor decision making in these micro ways, in these little small ways of like deciding I have enough time to fit this in and deciding that it would be a good decision to like spend my money here and deciding that I should just do this first after this and then just the stuff that ensues. And as I was explaining all this to Catherine, I said, I need to make decisions and I need to actually make the right ones. And her eyes teared up a little. And she looked at me and said, Tara, you're not making terrible decisions. You probably have ADHD. And it was so in hindsight, it's so obvious. But in the moment, all I felt like was there's no way that I have ADHD because I'm terribly accomplished as a human being. And in my head, I didn't have a full ignorance of it. I did understand that ADHD was a thing that a lot of women were recognizing later. There was a lot that I understood about it, but because I hadn't ever really contemplated it in a mirror, I had never thought about it in terms of matching it to my own experiences in my own life. I was thinking about like a little 10-year-old boy who can't sit still in school. And of all the things that I could do, I could go to school. That was something that I did almost constantly throughout my life. But truly, it made me feel like that wasn't something that I could really relate to because I was able to accomplish those types of things. Anyway, all of this led to me finally sort of having the blinders off, and then I got my own diagnosis. I went through the process of working with someone and got a diagnosis. And it's fun because when they do the diagnosis with you, they don't just give you a like yes or no. They give you a, on the spectrum, on the scale. And I'm pretty like severe on this scale of things like the inattentiveness of ADHD. So why is this important? I felt like it was important to share with you guys this part because it has been weird. Let me tell you, it's just been weird. When something like this, I'm so used to getting obsessed about a topic. I mean, a lot of you have seen me go through different interests, right? You guys have seen me when I get excited about, one particular aspect or one new way of coaching or whatever, and I'm used to that kind of excitement. But this was disorienting in a way where I was feeling flashes of being excited because I understood what was so obvious to me. I mean, really just looking back through my life and realizing that this has been plaguing me for so long. And having a different frame on anything in that way is refreshing. And when you have this kind of mind, it's like something brand new to pursue and to learn about. On the other hand, the grief that I felt of what I had done to myself, like just the amount of reprimand the amount of shame, just like the overwhelming sense of never growing up, of being childish, all this stuff that we're going to talk about a little bit tonight. It was there was some grief there of I recognized that I myself as a coach, as an NLP coach, for God's sake. I mean, a coach who is skilled in rewiring the brain could have missed something so important and so obvious. And so it was just disorienting me in a lot of ways. But what was most important to me and what is most important to you guys here and why I felt really confident inviting you into this and sharing this with you is that it has completely changed the filter that I'm using for coaching. And as an NLP coach, this is so, so relevant to the work that we do. And some of you may have been around through a little dark period I went through a couple of years ago, where I really started to get skeptical about some of the more old school classic, the way that NLP had been used, and certainly the way that it has been presented in the public. And it just felt to me like there's something wrong. There's something wrong in the presentation of what it can do. And I recognized that it worked in a lot of people's lives the way that it was prescriptively supposed to work, but I also was witnessing that it didn't always hold. It didn't always work, and I certainly had personal experiences where it wasn't working for me. And this all really took a hit into sort of that authenticity and the transparency of what we're doing and how we're doing it and what to expect and all that kind of stuff. So, this whole sort of understanding has cleared up so much of that for me. Like so many things like this do happen this way, a lot of it has really crystallized again my belief in NLP. The stuff that we do is in fact so important and so possible and so useful and beneficial to people's lives. But a lot of it that I was questioning, I realize now that I was questioning for good reason. And it's starting to increasingly become obvious to me where I can modify things, where I can understand things differently. And in a lot of cases, we actually have really good tools to be able to do that, like emotional regulation and the sequencings of things and the strategies. So I'm kind of going to use tonight to just introduce a lot of this to you so that you can see where I'm going through this series. So I'm not going to get deeply into any one area tonight. I don't know how long this is gonna go on, guys. This might be like a 3-week series, or it might be like an 8-week series. I have no idea. I just week to week, I'm gonna explore these things and share them, and then based on what's coming back, I will likely sort of pick the areas that seem to be most interesting to people and most relevant. Okay, so let me explain this whole trendy late diagnosis, specifically for women, ADHD thing that's going around is as you would expect. Obviously, there's a ton of misinformation. Even more so, there's simplification that is almost criminal in terms of how it gets presented. And then, of course, the stereotypes and then the making assumptions and jumping to conclusions. And while I am not here to convince anybody of anything, I have spent a lot of time in the numbers. And sadly, it's one that you can't really come out with numbers for because we're in this moment in time where we're recognizing that very few people were getting diagnosed when they were young, when it would have been most useful for them, probably to understand that they were wired differently. And specifically, girls and any other demographic. Little white boys were getting diagnosed. But anything kind of beyond that, there wasn't a lot of diagnosis going on. And we will talk a little bit, I'll just touch on it tonight, but the difference between how it shows up in girls typically and how it shows up in boys is just so, so different. And a lot of people like myself, like I admitted earlier, were really thinking about ADHD as something that couldn't possibly be what they have because they have been able to sit still through, years and decades of school or something similar and been successful therefore, or simply the intelligence, right? People who are really, really smart tend to avoid believing that they could have ADHD because they're so capable of being successful in other ways. So there's all of this sort of misinformation around it, and I'm going to do my best to clear up some of that stuff. But the numbers are impossible. I've seen numbers as low as like 2.5% of people have it, all the way up to like 25% of people have it, and it really depends on like so many factors, right? How are you actually defining it? The DSM-5 has a definition of it, but you absolutely must have memory of your life before you're 12 years old. So if you don't happen to remember what it was like for you when you were in elementary school or be able to answer some of those questions, if you don't show signs of it before 12 years old, you're not going to get a DSM-5. You guys know what I'm talking about, like the actual medical diagnosis of it, which may or may not matter to you. And there's just so many other factors. So we're in the process. I think it's exciting because it's really growing our understanding of what it is and what it means, and we're probably going to find out. My hypothesis at this point is up in the upper end. I think we're going to find out that it's much more likely to be, 20% of people, not 2% of people, because I don't think there is anything deficient about it. We do understand a lot about the chemistry of it, and I'm going to get into that in a minute. But I would imagine that we're actually looking at just like a type of brain, and I don't think it'll be too long before the deficient part of this, the idea that it is like there is a typical normal brain, and then anything that is not that is considered to be atypical or, as a like a disorder or a dysfunction or something like that. I think that is likely going to disappear in our language very, very, very quickly as we start to understand that all we're dealing with is there are some brains, just like some people come out as brunettes and some people come out as blondes and some people come out as redheads, and nobody has a like, "Oh, your hair is atypical." It just is what it is. It comes out the way that it comes out. And so this type of wiring is just one way that the brain evolved. And this way of evolving has not been conducive to the way that structures, specifically school, most work environments, all of those, and pretty much anything that you can think of where the learning is like sit down in a seat and have it come to you from some sort of authority in front of you. So it's very often the way a boss will like train employees, right? So you go to a new job and you're told to sit in front of the tutorial for the next 6 hours and learn the information that is coming at you. Like that's gonna work for some people, it is not gonna work for this group of people, right? So there's a, endless examples of just how this isn't the best way for people to learn. So from the very, very get-go, this understanding, if you're potentially thinking that you yourself may actually be wired this way. If you love somebody in your, if you have somebody in your family or somebody that you know who you suspect maybe or know is wired this way, or certainly if you're a coach and or anyone in as a practitioner or a therapist or a healer or whatever, this is going to be useful just to understand a, a perspective on being able to look at others this way or perhaps yourself. So the biggest thing here is the dopamine. So when I started to understand what this meant, the dopamine is the driving factor. The dopamine is going to be the piece that for everybody who has ADHD is going to share this. So there's loads of qualities around ADHD that are actually going to be different person to person. They're going to be unique, right? So some people, I happen to score 9 out of 9 on the inattentive part of ADHD, which means that I'm the one wandering around the parking lot having like no idea where I parked. I'm the one who loses everything. I'm the one that like can't keep track of what I have promised people that I would send them or do. Like there's so many qualities about just like being so in the moment and being so focused on what I'm focused on that I just don't notice so much of what is going on around me and have a lot of difficulty with, and most people with ADHD do have this memory gap, which is essentially like you feel like you learn it because you actually do learn it really well. You just can't access it sometimes 10 minutes later, sometimes an hour later. So you're probably not, a lot of people with the inattentive type are going to have trouble like memorizing lyrics to a song. You think you know them, but you can never actually remember them. You might have heard the song a million times for 20 years and you still couldn't sing it. But as soon as you hear them, you know them, that sort of thing. So there's other people that score very, 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 that's not where for them the greatest impact of the ADHD. It's not on the inattentive scale. And so for them, they may actually have a great ability to notice detail. In fact, they may be able to focus on detail in a way that is sort of feels almost compulsive to them, like is over the top. So there's lots of ways that you're going to find that there are differences, but what is never ever different is this dopamine chemical response where the gates don't open unless you have dopamine. So your executive functioning, which is most of you understand and you know is like the part of your brain that does all of the adulting, essentially. So this is the part of your brain that like plans and organizes and keeps track of things and can do all of those things that you need to be able to do to execute a project, to complete on things, to actually like keep things in order and make them make sense and logically, get you from where you started to where you were hoping to end up. All of that is executive functioning and it happens in this prefrontal cortex. And that gets opened for, as I complain about simplified, but the simplified way of understanding it is it needs the gas that it needs to run is dopamine. So what we do know about neurology right now is that people who have ADHD tend to have very low dopamine and low dopamine receptors. So, what that means is that in order to open that gate, so to get the part of your brain that has to operate in order to do those things and do them well, needs dopamine to open. And when it doesn't have dopamine, it just simply doesn't work very well. So, somebody who has a neurotypical brain, so someone who is actually just, what we would normally call normal, has enough dopamine receptors and enough dopamine going that when they think to themselves, it's 4:30, I better start dinner. The idea of getting dinner organized so that things happen in an orderly fashion, so that when the kids get home, the dinner's on the table, so that whatever, all of these sort of contributing factors that are going to allow for the evening to go in the way that they want to go, that creates enough dopamine for their brain to go, okay, where's the recipe? Where's all the stuff? And they get the stuff and they are able to actually get dinner together. Somebody who has, depending on the severity, right, can't get the dopamine going. When you think to yourself, it's 4:30 or it's, whatever time, and I need dinner to get on the table. You're not lacking any understanding. It's not that you don't know that if you don't get dinner on the table, it's going to be like it maybe was the other 500 times when you actually don't really get it done on time and the kids get all rangy and you end up like making the pasta before you even have the sauce done and like it just ends up being something where there's this flurry and it doesn't work out the way that you would like it to work out. You're not unaware of that. You're not unaware of the fact that it would be really helpful at this point to like get the recipe, focus on making it, whatever it is. It's just that you can't get your brain to cooperate. So you actually can't get the part of your brain that needs to just focus on this for a minute to, for 10 minutes to get it all organized, to stay focused long enough to do it all. So your brain will indeed go, oh, yeah, I should do that. But chances are there's something with more urgency that has a higher dopamine hit that is going to steal your mind away from opening the thing to get the recipe. Like maybe the other recipe that all of a sudden you're looking at and it looks really good. And then 2 minutes later, you've forgotten entirely that you're making dinner and you're like, down this other whatever it is. Or it could be that there's a project that you realize that you haven't been at, or there may be, A, B, C, D, 12, whatever it is. If it hijacks your dopamine, it's not simply that you are being lazy or that you're not smart enough to figure out that you should actually stay focused on the task at hand or any of those things. What's happening is that you don't have the fuel to open the gates for the executive functioning for the task that your brain knows has to happen. So you get distracted by whatever you get distracted by, or you start to do one part of it and you get so absorbed in doing that part of it that you forget the other parts of it. And as that's happening, the chamber is only actually working so long as the dopamine is firing for it. So, what a lot of people will do, me will do, is you'll wait until it's like 10 after 5 and everybody's going to be home in 12 minutes. And you said you would have dinner done. And now you can focus like a superhero, right? Now you're in this like, oh shit. And everything often gets done. And it actually gets done sometimes. I mean, depending on your skill. For me, the cooking thing never actually works out well because I'm not a good cook. I don't really know how to cook and I don't like cooking. So that always sort of ends up in a cluster. But for other things, once you get that adrenaline shot, the adrenaline shot is what creates the dopamine. The dopamine opens the executive functioning, and all of a sudden I can get the three pots going at once and I can get everything to work and I can manage to do as well as I can do. But my literally, until I had that shot of dopamine up into my brain, I couldn't get my brain to work. So if this is something that you experience, this is, I would say, on any given day, this probably happened to me, I don't know, half a dozen times throughout the day, where there would be something requiring my attention. I could not get my brain to go on the thing that needed my attention, but I was talking to Catherine about this. I'm gonna reference Catherine, guys, she's here, and Catherine, I hope you don't mind, but Catherine also studies neurodivergence, and so has a plethora of information and everything, so she's been a huge, huge support and help to me recently. But I was joking saying, like, I leave things because I always know there's going to be a burst. So what people don't understand when they're dealing with the sort of type of ADHD that I was dealing with was this ability. We in many ways we talk about people self-medicating for various things. We self-medicate for our own dopamine. So what I would do is I would actually intentionally, but not like intentionally in that I knew what I was doing, unintentionally is that I didn't know what I was actually doing, was I was waiting until I could get a giant charge of dopamine, knowing that that would actually make something easy for me to do, and I have 48 years of experience telling me that chances are it's a gamble. I know it's a gamble, but I frequently come out on the good side of the gamble. Frequently, it works out for me to wait for this burst. So I do it with just about everything in my life. So what I have always, always done was what I have assumed that it was just like some weird procrastination. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But I'll wait for bursts. So I won't, what doesn't even occur to me anymore to start dinner at 4 o'clock, even though we have to eat by 5:15 because everybody has practice at 5:30 and, all that. I know all that stuff. But I also know that there is no way on God's green earth that I am going to, at 4 o'clock, get things laid out and, like, all that kinda stuff and pull this off. So I know what's gonna happen. I'm gonna get that burst, and then I'm going to be able to pull it off. It's gonna drive everyone around me a bit crazy, and in my view, they'll focus on the times it doesn't work. But I feel like I will mostly get it done. But I'll also do it with things like, there's laundry to be done. I know that I may put it beside, like, the stairs, but I'm not concerned about it because I know sometime in the next probably 24 hours or 48 hours or something, I'm gonna get a big burst, and I'm gonna get this sense of, like, I need to get everything tidy, I need to get everything clean. I'm gonna get this burst of, like, everything needs to go where it needs to go now, and I never knew when that burst was coming or what prompted it or what triggered it, but I did know that history had taught me that it would happen, and I don't live in a messy house, and I don't live with things everywhere, but don't I don't do things, like, on a schedule. Just because the laundry needs to be done does not mean that I'm going to do it now. It means that now, in my brain, somewhere, it's floating around that, like, the laundry probably needs to be done soon, and I might move it somewhere, but I wait for the burst. And again, I had no idea that what I was doing was I was legitimately waiting until I could get that dopamine so that I could actually do it more effectively than if I tried to do something like that without any dopamine in there, just being forced to do it or berating myself. You can do anything with willpower, obviously, right? I mean, you can actually do anything with enough willpower, but it's miserable. It's not fun. Like, it doesn't feel very good. You're going against the stream, right? So after a lifetime of doing stuff, when you're always doing things, if you're always doing things on a schedule by somebody else's rule because you're supposed to, because you're told that this is what responsible adults do, because this is the way your mom did it, whatever your things are, this is what your husband or your wife is asking you to do, you can do them. I mean, you're not incapable of doing them, but it's going to make for a very unpleasant life because you're constantly pushing yourself into a place where your brain doesn't want to be. And so things like that are Again, what I didn't understand. I don't know if some of you remember probably 2 or 3 years ago when I was doing a courageous coach. I had just learned from a really prominent coach, like one of these sort of, like celebrity coachy type people who are very Tony Robbins-esque, sharing, these universal things that if you want to be successful, do these 3 things. And if you do these 3 things, you're going to be a super successful business person, the way they frame everything. And it was very agreed upon, this concept of eat the frog first. So have you guys heard this? Eat the frog first. And it fundamentally means that, like, wake up, do the dirty stuff first, do the thing that you least want to do first, get it out of the way, and then your day will be more productive. This to me was, I heard it, I probably tried it because I tried all the stuff back then. And I just knew in my bones that this did not work for me. And it was interesting because I was an NLP practitioner. So I was like, okay, I was indoctrinated through all of my NLP training that anything you want to be, you can be. If you aren't a morning person, but you want to be, you can be. If you aren't someone who likes to eat the frog first, just change and then you will be. But the difference between wanting to be a certain way or wanting to change something and actually being able to do it are like universes apart. So in my bones, I felt like this does not work. And so I actually tested it for a while. I worked with the clients that I had, and I realized it did for some people actually effectively help them. But there was a whole bunch of us whom it didn't help and it didn't work. And so I did a whole courageous coach talk about it at the time when I was doing a lot of mentoring and coaching, that I'm pretty sure you can do it the opposite way. And it's so fascinating to me now because what I realized I'm doing, I was already coaching this way when I recognized it was someone who this was going to work better for. But I naturally, intuitively, in terms of self-medicating, I will do things like I will wake up and the first thing that I'll do is like rearrange all the pictures on my wall. There's a ongoing joke in my house of like nothing stays still. Like my kids have grown up with like the living room shifts every 3 weeks. And I do those things not because it's something that I would like plan to come home and do and move the furniture. It's because I have an email or a series of emails that I have to get out that I am dreading doing. It's because I have, some homework or like, school stuff that I have to get done. It's because I have to do the administrative tasks of my business. I have to invoice. I have to like, whatever the thing is that I have to do, even doing things that like I love providing people with recordings, but doing them is kind of a drag. So like any of that stuff where I either consider it boring or it just simply doesn't have a dopamine hit for me, I was finding anything else to do before I would do it. And so I would literally paint my walls. I feel like I should walk over to I like painted a mural on my wall, a couple of them now. And Alan's just like, "What? Why are you painting our walls? People don't paint their walls, Tara." I have to. I have to. Because there are these times when I need to do something creative. I need to move the furniture around. I need to paint the walls. I need to go for a run. I need to go move all the flowers around on the deck right now. All of this stuff that I would do. And what I was actually doing was I was filling my dopamine gauge. I was on an empty tank. I was waking up. I had to get all this stuff done. I knew intuitively somehow that this isn't just a matter of not wanting to do this. My brain isn't going to work. It's going to take me 4 hours to do what should take me 30 minutes if I try to do it in this state of it's like trying to make a car go with no gas. It's getting frustrated with somebody who's not walking, who has no legs. It's just you can't make your brain do this stuff without a tremendous amount of pain and pushing and suffering. So what I was actually doing for myself, and I feel like a genius now, I was filling my tank. So I would go and paint my wall and move my furniture and go for a run or do whatever the thing is that I would have to do. And I would get all my dopamine filled up so that I could do the task, or I would actually do the task that I love, right? I would redesign my website. You guys, anyone who has been on my website over the last 10 years knows that my website has changed, like to the point where Alan and Sam, when we were at Inspired Outcomes, wouldn't share any passwords with me. They had to keep me out of the website because I would just go in and like change the color or change the font. But all of this stuff was the stuff that I was doing in order to get all of that dopamine. Because what I learned was that if I could get my dopamine high enough, do the creative tasks, do all the stuff that I love, I could squeak out then the emails at the end. I could get 6 invoices out in 20 minutes. And knowing that intuitively, understanding that my brain will do this is not hard for me to do. It's just hard for me to do it when I don't wanna do it, which made me feel like I was a petty, pouty little 8-year-old because that was legitimately what it seemed like to me was I am so childish that I can't do things unless I want to. Which honestly is that is the definition of immaturity, right? The definition of immaturity is only doing what you wanna do and nothing that you have to do. And that is what I felt like all of the time. I happen to actually get into the type of career that I love so much that coming to coach, coming to train, writing the articles, like 50% of what I do, I love, 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 love doing. I like skip to the office to go see my clients. I get excited when I get online to see somebody because I love it. So it's been easy. And this is the common experience of people with ADHD is that when you love a task, it doesn't even feel like work. A, it's easy, easy, easy peasy because you're doing something that you are so overflowing with dopamine that it just everything feels good and natural. And B, you're probably really good at it because, again, people with ADHD who tend to be very poor at some things tend to be quite gifted at the thing that they have chosen if they're lucky enough to find the passion, right? If they're lucky enough to have like kept their confidence up through a childhood when they were probably made to feel like they weren't particularly clever. If they manage to, get through all of that and find the thing that they are really passionate and really, really interested in, then they tend to be exceptional at it. And this is why that just about everyone out there is going to agree that almost all of the innovative geniuses of our time, almost all of them would most certainly have ADHD, just because of the requirements of the hyperfocus that comes along with it. We haven't talked about it yet, but you guys have heard about the hyperfocus, right? Because when we get flooded with dopamine, it is literally like a flood. So in my self-medicating with do the fun thing before the adult thing or the work thing or whatever, the problem is that what's called the dopamine flood. So once we do get dopamine going for us, it tends to not ever want to stop. It's like feeding a drought, right? So all of a sudden, so I don't know about you guys. I did it this morning, actually, trying to put this talk together. I decided that I was going to do a bunch of stuff with the deck and physically stopping from doing something that's giving that giant dopamine flood, which anybody who has addictions can understand, right? Gambling, sex, drugs, rock and roll, all the things that are, traditionally sort of associated with addiction also happen to people with ADHD just in our focus. So like when I start painting that wall, I might paint that wall until 2 o'clock in the morning until I actually fall asleep painting the wall. If I sit down to do a puzzle, again, it's a joke in my house that I love nothing more than doing puzzles because I can just disappear. Like I can, when I am looking at that puzzle, literally, I don't feed myself. I don't need to get up. I could sit there for 10 hours. And so I only let myself do them twice a year. I do one on Boxing Day and I do one during the summer. I pick a day because if I start doing that on a regular Wednesday afternoon, if I have a puzzle sitting there, I can't do it like a normal person where I would come over for half an hour and relax and do the puzzle for a bit. I can only do it or not do it. And so this feeling of like physically trying to get yourself to stop doing the things wherein you're in this dopamine like overflow is tremendously difficult. So obviously when you have children who need to be picked up at, dance and who need a soccer practice to be at, and you've just got yourself into like a dopamine flow with your work, is incredibly difficult. I'm actually going to have a chart for you that I'll share with you to differentiate the difference between neurotypical procrastination, which obviously everyone, typical or diverse, doesn't matter, procrastinates sometimes, doesn't really like being bored, has trouble stopping when they're doing something that they really love doing. The differences, I'll actually articulate them really clearly. The differences are measurable when you look at them side by side. So what I learned was where my threshold is. So this morning, I could feel myself. I did all the like pleasure stuff, but I could actually feel when I was getting to the point where I was going to start regretting losing the time on the other end. So I knew I need enough dopamine through me so that I feel really good about sitting down and doing the strategic part of what I have to do right now. But I can't overdo it so that I leave myself with such a tight window that I then am really disappointed and frustrated with myself that I took too much time in the pleasure and not enough time to actually create the quality that I want to create. And so it's about finding this threshold. Now that I understand what I'm doing, I can actually do this with precision. Because the other thing that gets in the way, and this is the core of what I want to speak to, is for the first 48 years of my life, when I did this stuff, even while clearly I was intuitively setting myself up for the dopamine and I learned that I could do things and everything else, I felt like I was doing something wrong the entire time I was doing it. So when I did the thing to generate the dopamine, I would be feeling guilty for what I was doing. I would be berating myself for being, the type of person that procrastinates like this, wondering what was wrong with me. Why can't I just like sit down and do the thing? I've put it off for 4 days now. And like the pleasure, I was still getting the dopamine, but I was also getting this cortisol hit of how ashamed I was of my behavior, that I couldn't just do it. I wouldn't tell anybody that I was doing this. I'm a coach. I mean, people hire me to perform well, and I help people really well. But in my own life, I couldn't actually get it to operate. I could not figure out how to get myself to cleanly sit down and do the stuff that so many other people that I was coaching were actually able to do. So I've completely let go of those negative emotions. So when I'm doing this stuff now, like I said, I just feel like a genius. I just feel like this is so wonderful. Clever was I to get this job that I don't have to go show up at a job at 9 o'clock. And I have struggled, believe me, working for yourself and being self employed and all the financial uncertainty and self promotional. There's so much involved. You never really are not working. But the payoff is I do set my own schedule. I just spent last week watching my kids at track. I am able to, in this brilliant way, create whatever window I need to do this dopamine. And without the negative emotion, I am about 500% more productive now than I was a month ago. And nothing has changed for me. I still have this brain. I still legitimately can't do something that I don't want to do unless I set myself up for it. I still have time blindness. I still literally, and oh, I should show you, but I bought this clock that I will talk about in a minute. But I got a clock that actually shows me time. So all of these things that I've done for myself, the most important part, yes, it's changed my behavior a little bit, but the most important thing is that I have learned and cleared. I've been doing a lot of like timeline therapy and core transformation, a lot of the work on myself to clear it away, that I no longer feel like I'm a child and that everybody else around me is an adult and I'm somehow stuck in this perpetual immature state. And there's an identity piece. So once you get all those emotions out of the way, the emotions clear you up to get the reward that you've actually been trying to get the whole entire time. So I now have this clean access to the dopamine that I need to do the work, which is making me way more productive. The other thing that has happened, and I'll just ask you to sort of follow me through this windy road. When I didn't understand what was going on, when I just thought that I was like weirdly good at some things and unbearably bad at other things. And because this tends to happen to women, particularly in our 40s, all of this stuff is partly chemical. So we'll talk about that in a second. But a lot of it too is the demands of what your life asks for you, right? So when I was in my 20s, I just traveled around the world. It was like legitimately, I was in China and I'd like miss my plane and it just felt like another fun adventure of like, miss my plane and I have $32 in my pocket. This is going to be fun. My sister used to joke about my toxic positivity because it was just, I don't know, everything was fun. Like it was just, I thought everything was fun. And that worked really well through my 20s. Idiot. managed to work. I mean, my first son was born in Africa, and Alan and I were on this big adventure. Making mistakes when your kids are little, you can just improvise. And I was great with my kids. I didn't get worked up about very much at all because I could I could just go with it. I was the most chill parent, having no idea that this was my ADHD in full force. But then, everything about parenting and starting to parent kids that actually rely on you. Okay, so the thing that was happening was that I had built an identity around the stuff that I was secretly ashamed of. I have been in the field of trying to understand people and how they're wired and how they feel for over a decade now. And one of the things that I know to be true is that when we are embarrassed about something, when we are ashamed of something that we do, a behavior, a response, a feeling, a thought, we will go over the top to try and justify it as something that we shouldn't be shameful for. So the intention of creating an identity that matched who I was, that I could support, that actually I could feel like wasn't a wrong part of me, was so important to me that I would go out of my way to try and justify these quirks in my personality. So the fact that I was always late, that I ran my whole entire life 2 to 5 minutes late, I would need to believe myself to be doing something that wasn't just an inability. And whether I was doing this consciously or unconsciously, and it would go back and forth. But it was really important to me that other people weren't judging me as being all the things that it could be interpreted as, right? Which is inconsiderate, uncaring, unthoughtful, disorganized, incapable, disrespectful. All these things that I knew that I wasn't, but I also really understood that it is the common world out there that this is how it's interpreted when you can't show up on time. And so I would fight for it. I would fight for having to demonstrate that that wasn't me, even while this behavior was going on. And so I would almost go out of my way to not change the behavior. Because if I had to change the behavior, it was like I was admitting that my behavior was wrong all along. Right. So if I went to a coach who could have got me to be super prompt and show up everywhere 5 minutes early, it would have made me have to admit that I could have A, done this a long time ago, maybe, or B, like, that I've been making the mistake of not doing this my whole life. And that was painful. Like, that was painful for me to have to admit that, like, an actual grown up wouldn't draw on her walls, or I don't draw on my walls. I actually paint really nice murals, but my adult version of drawing on the walls, I would defend that rather than not do that because of the same thing. So what's happened is that in terms of, my fear, like probably so many of you, is that people use a label like ADHD to excuse themselves from certain behaviors that, like, I believed before this, I thought everybody had. I thought everybody found procrastination, the easiest way. And I thought everybody, found making dinner hard and blah, blah, blah. But just everybody else was better at doing it than I was. And so rather than feeling like it provides me with an excuse, what I'm feeling like is I'm not doing anything wrong by having time blindness. The fact that I literally don't have the same relationship with time as neurotypical people do is not anything wrong with me. It's literally just the way that my brain is wired. And so it would be really, really helpful and useful for me to figure out how to be on time for those things that matter for me to be on time for, like my clients. This is something that, in acknowledging that it's harder for me to do, but knowing that if I can figure out how to do this, if I can figure out how to sit down and pay the bills on time or invoice my clients the day I have them instead of a week later, or any of those types of things, rather than having to dig in on this, I just don't care about those things, or I'm just, make it part of this quirky personality that I am. I can pick and choose now what feels essentially aligned to who I am as a human being. And what are some of the ways that I'm wired that would actually be beneficial for me to find ways around? So I am about 1,000 times more likely today to be on time to something because I figured out how to use my little visual clock, rather than continue to insist that being 2 minutes late is not a big deal and the whole world is so uptight. That difference is night and day. not having to drive your identity into a place where you actually don't have a choice. So when I was saying to you that earlier, it crystallizes some of what is so good about NLP is this kind of stuff where it is possible for me to come up with strategies and to go into my internal representations in my brain, change the representations in my brain so that I can actually fire some dopamine, so that I can get myself to see it differently, so that I can actually have a different experience of time, so that I can show up with my clients on time. And my ability to do that just means that I have given myself choice. Now, when it's a Saturday afternoon and somebody says, "Do you want to go to the park?" I'm probably gonna show up a good 10 minutes late, no matter what I do, because I may choose at that point or whatever it is, when I'm not being inconsiderate to somebody or disrespectful to somebody, I'm gonna go back to my preference, right? I'm gonna go back to, like, if you wanna go on vacation with me, do not, like, have me have to show up at breakfast at 10 and then, play tennis at 12 and do this, because it's just gonna blow. I'm just not gonna it's not I can't do it. I'm not gonna have fun. I can do it. I'm not gonna have fun doing it. So, you can create greater choice. And all of my coaching now, understanding that what I can change is the emotion around the ways that the brain is operating. And I can actually allow people to have greater choice in what they want to actually change and what they want to keep as their own preferences and their own essential self, their identity. And this to me is like reevaluating coaching, especially NLP coaching. I now feel like I have the greatest possible tool. And I also feel like I have to go back and revamp and notice things like, and this is what I'm ending on, guys, and I'll drop a whole bunch of this in another email of like how I'm actually going to go through these things systematically over the summer and address them on their own. But being able to shift things like moving away from and moving toward, to understand that a person with ADHD legitimately does not. I will fight anyone, like any of the hardcore NLP people. We are actually drawn both ways, not one way. We're not oriented one way. We are actually oriented to dopamine and urgency away from the avoidance stuff and the moving toward the like super fun thing equally are going to drive us into our greatest strategies. It's not one or the other. In neurotypical people, it actually is going to be one or the other. They actually do have choice. They're going to have a preference. They're going to have like a pattern that shows up as being mostly moved toward, or they're happiest when they're moving away from, happiest when they move toward. That sort of stuff is actually going to work with them. So there's all of these like little pieces of how we've been working. And I think that as a coach, as an NLP coach, it's going to be really specific to what you've learned. As someone who may not be NLP trained, or if it's something that you just are interested in more for yourself, the more I learn about this and the more tools that I sort of uncover using my own skill and my own experiences and my clients and all that kind of stuff. And I am actually, just so you know, as I finish here, I am in the process of getting a ADHD coach certification to tag on to my current certifications so that I can actually be working primarily with people who are struggling with this. Probably women, not necessarily women, but there's just so many women who are starting to understand at 40 years old that they are not anxious. I had a whole PDF that I didn't have time to get through that I will share with you guys this week. The difference between anxiety and ADHD, they are not the same thing. And so many women think that they have an anxiety disorder. So many women think they're dealing with hormone stuff. And hormones, by the way, you do end up losing estrogen. Estrogen is vital for dopamine production. And so you do end up with less dopamine when you're going through perimenopause and menopause. And that does absolutely tank a woman who's got an ADHD wired brain, because your chemistry is even more in your way and difficult and becoming an obstacle, significantly difficult, more difficult than it was before. So all the stuff that you may have been able to use previously, all of a sudden it's not working for you for real because it's not there. So we can change the emotions around everything, but we can't actually change the chemistry in there. And so there's just so many options. So guys, I'm going to stop here. I got through half of what I intended to get through. So Stay tuned.